When we talk about video game reboots, it's hard to go past Crystal Dynamics' Tomb Raider series. Since its release in 2013, the series has gone from strength to strength, bringing fast and brutal gameplay and deeper character exploration to a franchise that had slipped further and further into joke territory for years. It's just a shame then that Shadow of the Tomb Raider, the latest in the series, merely comes off as a shadow of its former self. One of the biggest successes of the reboot so far has been the exploration of Lara Croft's early career, seeing her grow from a person who struggled to kill in order to survive, into someone who would more confidently take the fight to her enemies was captivating, but I feel like Shadow of the Tomb Raider undercuts this almost immediately. Without spoiling too much, Lara is directly responsible for some near cataclysmic events within the opening minutes of the game, and when she's confronted with this information, all she does is pout. Lara feels less like a confident woman who knows what she's doing and why, and more like a petulant child. I have never seen a core returning character be made so unlikable so quickly in a sequel. This less endearing characterization is what we get for the entire game too. Lara initially shows little compassion for the people affected by her actions, and midway into the second act she goes full-on psychopath, and while this tone change is pulled off in a legitimately intimidating fashion, I just don't think it fits with the rebooted Lara. As far as the rest of the game's story goes, it's entertaining, but I found few elements to be particularly memorable. You have a secret global organization trying to track down mythical artifacts that contain the power to change the world, and Croft has made it her mission to stop them. It's a story we've seen plenty of times before, for example in the previous game in the series, and while it's not a bad setup, the character arc that Lara is on just isn't as interesting, so it comes off as kinda generic. Still entertaining, but not particularly engaging. To the narrative's credit, it does take you to some pretty diverse and interesting locations, ranging from creepy tombs, South American churches, and some of the best looking dense jungle I've seen in any modern video games. So many of the environments are vibrant and colourful, and the return of ambient wildlife in these environments makes it super easy to get immersed in Shadow's world. There's something genuinely unnerving about exploring the jungle before stopping in your tracks after spotting a jaguar, and even worse is hearing the vicious bastard and not seeing where it's coming from. To that point, Shadow of the Tomb Raider's sound design is effective, though there are a few noticeably less impressive elements to be found. While the soundtrack is serviceable and suitably more ominous in tone, the voice acting is pretty spotty. The core characters, Lara, Jonah, and the main antagonist, all come to life with impassioned performances, but I found that a lot of this was limited to the cutscenes. A high percentage of the NPC dialogue is delivered in such a stilted, boring fashion, and outside of cutscenes, Croft herself sounds like she's incredibly bored and unfazed by everything. Thankfully, you can get through the game without dealing with too many of these robotic NPCs, although if you want access to some of the better weapons, as well as a handful of Croft's skills, there's a disproportionately high number of their side quests to take on. Aside from a few that lead to challenge tombs like those found in the previous games, the majority of these objectives are boring fetch quests that feel like they were included to pad out the game's runtime. Honestly, ignoring these filler missions, Shadow of the Tomb Raider does feel rather short in retrospect. Part of that feeling comes from how rarely you'll pass through the same area of the game beyond those used as obvious hub worlds. Earlier games in the reboot series would have you gaining new gear and techniques as you progressed, which would often open up new paths and locations you've already explored, not unlike a Metroidvania. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, on the other hand, pretty much gives you all your relevant traversal options within the first few hours, meaning that your path through the game world will generally be a straight line, as opposed to a line that would at least loop around and double back on itself in interesting ways. The flip side of this change is that you don't really get a lot of cool unlocks as you progress. The most you get in terms of unlocking new zones are the returning shotgun, rope ascender, and lockpick, and you don't even need those last two to finish the game. You literally just buy them off a merchant who randomly disappears and reappears throughout the game, which leads me to another issue I have with Shadow, the importance of money. The inclusion of merchants to this series shifts the game's focus from rewarding you with unique and useful gear to allowing you to pick and choose which gear you want to get, and while there is merit to that change in focus, Shadow cripples itself in this regard by only really giving you guns and outfits to buy. When you factor in the idea that you can just upgrade every weapon anyway, the differences between your unlock options are negligible at best, and the only two progression unlockers that merchants sell are the aforementioned rope ascender and lockpick, two glorified keys for different kinds of locks. Even worse are the game's skill trees that contain only a handful of skills that any sane player could actually want. A weirdly high number of these skills relate to Lara's crafted consumables, which I never really found useful at all, so why would I want to waste skill points on them? What you end up with is a system where you get the majority of your progression-related gear near the outset, the stuff you don't get immediately isn't important at all, and the stuff you're able to buy is a nice thought, but in practice just isn't worth worrying about. With such a wild change in how the game approaches progression and related unlocks, I don't see why the developers wouldn't also shift the structure around. Something a little less linear, where you could choose the items in the order that you need them, a la The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds, might have been a bit more appropriate, though that would require the merchants to sell anything of actual consequence, wouldn't it? For some reason, Eidos Montreal thought it would be a good idea to actually take away certain unlockable gear, like climbing arrows, which added a neat twist on the previous game's platforming mechanics. Speaking of, I feel like the game's platforming mechanics have taken a dip in polish since Rise of the Tomb Raider as well. Accidentally leaping to my doom was an occasional issue in the last game, but in Shadow of the Tomb Raider I found various situations where Lara would just refuse to grab onto ledges, or accurately use her grappling hook, even though I was certain I was doing what the game wanted me to do. Not to mention the camera that would just occasionally take umbrage with me trying to play the damn game. Admittedly, these instances of platforming awkwardness are not the majority of my experiences with Shadow, but they happen pretty regularly, and often ruined the flow of some of the game's most exciting moments. In contrast, Shadow of the Tomb Raider fares much better in the combat department in that it's never not functional, but I do have a few issues with Shadow's approach to gunfights as well. Despite the amount of options on offer for Lara's arsenal, none of the weapons feel wildly different from one another. Furthermore, there's just no real sense of feedback from shooting at enemies, thanks to animations just not feeling like they have any weight, an issue that the platforming also suffers from. On top of all that, there just aren't that many full-on combat encounters to be had in the game. For something that offers as many weaponry options as Shadow of the Tomb Raider does, the game balance feels heavily weighted in favor of platforming, and even when enemies are on screen, you're encouraged to use stealth wherever possible. Interestingly, Shadow of the Tomb Raider does add some neat mechanics to its usual stealth suite, such as having Lara camouflage herself using mud to more effectively stalk her enemies. I got a really cool Predator vibe from hiding in plain sight, as well as hauling guards into the treetops to quickly and quietly remove them from the scenario. The game also uses a similar feature to Spider-Man for PS4, where using your survival instinct will clue you in to whether certain guards are safe or unsafe to take down quietly. Unfortunately, this feature isn't nearly as reliable as it is in Spider-Man, as I found taking down supposedly safe enemies often resulted in alerted guards. In general, the stealth feels a lot less dynamic than previous games in the series as well, where one alerted guard didn't necessarily mean an entire compound would be onto your stealthy shenanigans. As much as I want to like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, it's not giving me much to work with here. Not everything is a mess, but even the parts that are genuinely exciting and engaging are marred by weird technical hiccups, as I mentioned before. On top of that, despite the game's best efforts to provide a wide variety of different outfit and weapon choices for you, a large chunk of the game forces you to use a certain small set of your gear for reasons that make less and less sense the more you think about it. And to top it all off, there's a weirdly high amount of bugs, ranging from weird visual glitches like doubling up character models, to bugs that prevent you from hitting 100% completion. What the hell happened here? Shadow of the Tomb Raider is bad. If this were 2013 and Shadow was the first game in the reboot series, then I'd be a little more lenient on it. I'll be 100% honest about that. But with two excellent games in the bag, it's kind of impressive that Shadow of the Tomb Raider takes so many steps backwards. Lara is far less relatable, the game's structure doesn't feel as engaging, rewarding, or well thought out, and on a mechanical level the experience is so inconsistent that for every moment of fun I had, there was a moment of frustration waiting around the corner to slap the smile off my face. If you're a newcomer to the franchise, don't even bother with Shadow of the Tomb Raider. And if you're a fan of the reboot series, wait until this one's on sale. Trust me,